So hands down, one of the most defining moments in A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones as a whole was Robert's rebellion. This was pretty much the final nail in the coffin when it came to the Targaryen dynasty, which was on the steady decline. After Aerys II went raving mad, killing people and burning them just because he could, the people had enough. He killed Ned's father and older brother, and Rhaegar seemingly kidnapped his sister, Lyanna, who was engaged to a young Robert Baratheon at the time. The Targaryens seemingly doing whatever they wanted, being cruel and paying no price for it, called for a change among the people, for justice and vengeance. The Starks, Tullys, Aarons, and Baratheons, the Stab Alliance, all came together to defeat their wicked Targaryen overlords. Despite having a good amount of allies and even support from the common folk, who actually hid Robert away at one point when the king's army came looking for him, the Targaryens still put up a good fight, despite some people being slow to lend them support. The most important battle during this time of rebellion was the Battle of the Trident. It was here that Robert Baratheon and Rhaegar Targaryen met on the battlefield. While Rhaegar wounded Robert, he could not make a finishing blow to end the rebellion. Instead, it was Robert with his warhammer that ended the war. He caved in Rhaegar's chest with a mighty blow, killing the crown prince. This marked the beginning of the end for the Targaryens. After Rhaegar's death, with news that the rebels were making their way to the capital, Tywin Lannister sacked the city of his former friend, King Aerys, as to be on the right side of history. The winning side of history. It was during this sack that the Mountain killed Rhaegar's wife Elia and his son Aegon. Rhaegar's oldest daughter Rhaenys was also killed during the sack as well. Having been betrayed by his former friend in hand, Aerys devised a plan to blow up King's Landing with the wildfire he had stored all over the city. But Jaime Lannister ended his life before he could, earning himself the moniker of Kingslayer and scorn throughout the realm. But the death of Aerys, Rhaegar, and his children wasn't the end of the Targaryen line. The king's youngest son Viserys still lived, and his mother ended up giving birth to his sister named Daenerys sometime later, though the queen would die in childbirth. Viserys and Daenerys were whisked away to safety across the Narrow Sea in Essos, where they waited for the day to reclaim their family's throne. But little did they know that they weren't the only claimants left to the Iron Throne. With the death of Rhaegar, Ned went to find his sister in a place called the Tower of Joy. Here he met two Kingsguard knights, one Gerald Hightower and Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning and the greatest knights in the realm. Both men died in defense of the tower, and it was here that through Bran we all learned the truth. Lyanna had run away with Rhaegar, married him in secret, and he had given her a son, who was also named Aegon like the prince's firstborn son, but we know him more commonly as Jon Snow, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, the White Wolf, and King in the North. The man who doesn't want it.
I don't want it.
The death of Rhaegar had a lot of consequences throughout the realm. This single act, aside from his dad being crazy and him hitting on another woman while he was married, when she was about to be married, marked the end of his family. His death signaled the defeat and ruin of his house, and it changed the course of history forever. But what if history had been written differently? What if during that fateful day on the Trident, the dragon actually overcame the stag, and Rhaegar killed his rival Robert? What if all those years ago, Rhaegar won the rebellion? Was at the stage during that fateful battle. Rhaegar meets Robert on horseback. Hammer and sword meet each other in a song of steel. As they fight, their horses collide, and they fall into the shallows of the ford. They gather themselves quickly and face each other down before surging forward. It's a furious exchange. Hammer versus sword. Stag versus dragon. Robert is stronger than Rhaegar. Much stronger. One good blow from his hammer could very well spell the end for the Targaryen prince. That had been the case for many who had faced a young Robert Baratheon.
He came running at me, this dumb, high-born lad, thinking he could end the rebellion with a single swing of his sword. Gods, I was strong then. Caved in his breastplate. Probably shattered every rib he had.
To win, Rhaegar would need to be faster, smarter, and just get him where he could. Maybe he could slow him down just enough to land a finishing blow. Death was the only way. Robert was too angry to be reasoned with. So the fight of Rhaegar and Robert ensues in the ford. It goes on for who knows how long, but both begin to reach their limit. Robert goes for one final blow on Prince Rhaegar, and unlike the canon, the blow that would have spelled the end for the Dragon Prince ends up missing its mark, albeit narrowly. But it's all Rhaegar needs. With one thrust of his sword, he deals the fatal blow to Lord Baratheon. Robert falls there on the trident, with defiance in hand and Lyanna's name on his lips. There will be no Ruby Ford now. The reason it was even called that is because Robert killed Rhaegar. He caved in his breastplate, which had rubies in it, and when those rubies fell into the water, they named it after those rubies. But now, Robert is dead, so the Ruby Ford doesn't exist. But Robert actually had a nickname during this battle. He was called the Demon of the Trident. So with the demon being slain, I imagine that instead of being called the Ruby Ford, it's called the Demon's Ford after this. In canon, the death of Rhaegar was a very crushing blow to the Loyalist army. With no leader, they pretty much fell apart and were routed. But now, Robert is the one who is dead. He started this whole thing. Even with Ned and Jon Arryn around, he was very much the head of this rebellion. I mean, it was literally named after him. So the death of Robert would be a very crushing and demoralizing blow to the rebels. The hammer of the rebellion has been shattered, and with Robert dead, many would probably consider the rebellion dead with him. With the death of Robert, the rebel army would start to fracture and fall apart. Ned and Jon Arryn would probably try to keep the army from splintering as best they could, but as I said before, Robert was the center of this whole thing, and now that he's gone, so are some people's wills to fight, so they have to retreat. This isn't the end for the rebels, though, because Ned and Jon are still alive, and the Tullys, Starks, and Arryns won't let this go until it's over. During the aftermath of the conflict, though, Walder Frey will also arrive. In canon, Walder Frey is also known as the Late Walder Frey, because he showed up so late to the battle, pretty much when it was over, it seems like he was waiting for one side to win before he swore his loyalty. In the original timeline, the rebels won, and he offered them his allegiance. This time, with the death of Robert and a clear Targaryen victory, Walder Frey will declare for the Targaryens, a loyalist, especially with the head of the rebellion now dead. This victory for Rhaegar also means a victory for Aerys as well for the time being. In canon, once he heard Rhaegar died, he sent Viserys and his wife away to Dragonstone to be safe, while he kept Rhaegar's children hostage to ensure the Dornish wouldn't turn on him. Here, there's no need for all of that. With the victory of his son over Robert, Aerys will probably be elated and not split up his family and hold the others hostage. Another thing that changed on the account of Rhaegar winning is that the Targaryens will most likely survive because of this. Originally, after Rhaegar died and the rebels made way for capital, Tywin, like Walder Frey, wanted to make sure he was on the right side of history. So under the guise of wanting to defend the city, he got the gates of King's Landing to open for him so he could sack it, kill Rhaegar's children, and secure the throne for Robert. If Rhaegar wins, Tywin will likely stay loyal to the Targaryens because there's nothing for him to gain doing otherwise. This means Elia is never assaulted and killed by Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, and her children Aegon and Rhaenys also live as well. And since Tywin never sacks the city, this means that Aerys never gets so desperate that he demands for Jaime to kill his own dad and then try to blow up the city to secure his own victory. And since that doesn't happen, that means Jaime doesn't have to break his Kingsguard oath and kill Aerys for the greater good. So his reputation stays intact, and House Lannister remains loyal to the crown. In the aftermath of the failure at the Trident, I imagine the rebels try to regroup in the north if they can, in hopes that the loyalists won't try to push them there. The north is a big and cold place. Outsiders may not have a good time there.
The north cannot be held. Not by an outsider, it's too big and too wild. And when the winter comes, the seven gods together couldn't save you and your royal army.
And I don't think Rhaegar would even want to push north so he could kill Ned because, after all, from what we know, he didn't steal Lyanna away like everyone else thinks. They loved each other, and killing his lover's brother would not be a good wedding present. Though I do imagine that Aerys will be calling for the heads of all the traitors who were still left alive so they could be burned. He would want Rhaegar to root them out so he could deliver the king's justice, though Rhaegar might be slow to listen to his father. I also imagine that in the aftermath of Robert dying, the Baratheons bow out of the rebellion completely. Now that Robert is dead, Stannis, by right, is the new Lord of Storm's End, and Stannis has no reason to keep fighting in the rebellion. It's mentioned that the Baratheon brothers did not love each other. Robert says so himself.
I never loved my brothers. Sad thing for a man to admit, but it's true. You were the brother I chose.
In fact, almost every time they're together, they can't really stand each other. So I don't really see any reason for Stannis to keep fighting in the rebellion, especially if he's still under siege like he was in canon. He didn't love Robert, at least not like Robert loved Ned. He has no connection to the Starks either. Ned was Robert's friend. Lyanna was Robert's fiancée, and she never even married him, so they weren't exactly bound in blood either. And that was the reason Stannis even supported Robert in the first place. Stannis has always been a man of duty, first and foremost. He does what he has to do to get done what needs to be done. He's willing to sacrifice people, sacrifice his family, even his own daughter, so he can fulfill what he believes is his duty. And when the time came for rebellion, it was actually a hard decision for Stannis to choose Robert over his duty and loyalty to the king. And the reason he supported Robert is pretty much summed up by the man himself.
Aerys ruled by right of all the laws in Westeros. Everyone knew the price of defiance, but there are deeper, older laws. The younger brother bows before the elder. I followed Robert.
Robert was the oldest. As the second-born son, at least the way I see it, he felt obligated to follow Robert because he was his big brother. He was the head of their house, the Lord of Storm's End, the head of their family. It was his duty to follow him. But now with Robert dead and Stannis the new head of House Baratheon, his duty has changed. He has no reason to follow Ned. As I just mentioned before, he has no connection to the Starks like Robert did. So his duty is to the king now. He's not going to try to avenge Robert. If anything, he'll probably think that's what he deserved. He rose against the crown and was punished for it. That's the way things went. The complete withdrawal of House Baratheon and, by extension, the other houses in the Stormlands would be a very demoralizing blow to the remaining rebels, and many would start abandoning the cause even faster than before. Ned would most likely still be defiant though because he wants justice for his father and brother, and he wants his sister back from Rhaegar. He still believes that she was kidnapped. He knows they can't stay in the north forever because eventually someone will have to make a move. I imagine that in this stalemate, Rhaegar would probably send a letter to Ned suing for peace. Ned may not want this, but I'll say that in the letter, Rhaegar actually tells Ned that he'll bring him to Lyanna if he agrees to meet him on peaceful terms. Obviously, when Ned tells people this, they're going to believe that it's a trap. Rhaegar is just as mad as his father. The last time Starks met Targaryens, they were butchered and burned. This obviously is just a ploy to get Ned alone so they can capture him and kill him. If Ned dies, then so does the rebellion, though it's already been on the steady decline since Robert's death. If they get Ned too, then there will be truly no hope left for justice or vengeance. Ned will be urged to stay in the north where it's safe for the time being, and he'll most likely think that this is a trap as well. But also knowing Ned, he would want his sister back. Just knowing that she was out there in the hands of someone like Rhaegar, who was probably just as mad as his father, the guy who took her away and killed his best friend, may be enough for him to take a chance, just for the hope of saving her. Or maybe it won't. Maybe Ned refuses to go and speak to Rhaegar because he can't be trusted. Until he gets another letter, this time written by Lyanna herself, urging him to come and meet with Rhaegar. Once again, everyone believed that this is a trap. They made her write that letter. This has been set up by Rhaegar and the Mad King just to get Ned alone so they can kill him. But with proof that his sister is alive at least, he may be willing to take that chance if it means that she could be saved. So Ned goes to the Tower of Joy, and this time around, instead of just being met by Gerald Hightower and Arthur Dayne, he's also met by Rhaegar, who shows him to Lyanna, who is in the midst of giving birth to their son. It's here that Ned learns the truth of everything. Lyanna was not stolen. She went away with Rhaegar willingly, married him in secret, and was now bringing their child into the world. This will undoubtedly give Ned some very mixed feelings. He believed that his sister had been kidnapped, and his best friend went to war for her. The woman many would say was the love of his life.
I only know she was the one thing I ever wanted. Someone took her away from me. And 7 kingdoms couldn't fill the hole she left behind.
But now it seemed like it was all for nothing. She never loved Robert. He threw his life away for her, and she didn't even love him. It was all a waste. But I imagine Rhaegar would talk to Ned and say that the rebellion wasn't a waste, because they were right. The Targaryens had been cruel. His father, the cruelest yet. And he did not deserve to sit the Iron Throne. I imagine Rhaegar would go out on a limb and ask Ned for support in him deposing his father, Aerys. Ned might refuse this though, seeing it as just another Targaryen game, ruining lives just so they could get whatever they wanted. His father and brother died because they wanted to save his sister, who didn't need to be saved at all. She ran away and said nothing. His best friend died because Rhaegar couldn't keep it in his pants and took someone he had no right to. Someone who was already betrothed. Now he wants his help to get his father's crown. It all seems greedy. It's like an insult. But it's only after Lyanna delivers her baby and talks to Ned that he agrees. Like in canon, Lyanna still dies in this timeline, and she makes Ned promise to protect her new son and help Rhaegar get rid of Aerys. It's only out of love and loyalty to his sister that he does agree to help, even after everything that's happened. And later on, we'll say that through a lot of convincing through the remaining rebels with Ned, and a few conversations with Tywin through Rhaegar, Robert's rebellion becomes Rhaegar's rebellion. He overthrows his father for his cruelty and roots out any allies he may have left. Aerys is imprisoned until he dies of natural causes, and Rhaegar rises as the first of his name. The rebels will most likely be pardoned for all their actions, and a new peaceful age will ensue. But it will not end here. While arguably we have the start of a new peaceful experience going on, with Aerys being dead and the Targaryens still in power, there are still a lot of issues we need to talk about. The first being Jon Snow. Jon Snow is the bastard name for Rhaegar's son with Lyanna. In the show, Lyanna says his true name is Aegon Targaryen. With Rhaegar around and involved with his son's life, it honestly makes no sense for Aegon to be Jon's name. It didn't in the show either, but even less so now in this new timeline. Rhaegar already has a son named Aegon, and since the mountain never killed him, he still has a son named Aegon. So it makes no sense for two brothers to have the exact same name, though I am aware there are some people in A Song of Ice and Fire that do, like Aegon the Elder and Aegon the Younger. But that's different because that's uncle and nephew. Then there's the brothers Eric and Arik Cargyle. They are not indistinguishable, but despite how similar their names are, being one letter off, you can still make the distinction between the two of them. Either way, it's very unlikely that Jon will be named Aegon like he was in the show. I know some people think his name should be Jaehaerys after the Conciliator because he was named Jon, but he was named Jon after Jon Arryn, the guy who fostered Ned and Robert. So while it's not impossible for his name to have a J, it's also still unlikely. His name could also be Aemon, kind of fitting the Cargyle brothers in a way. He'd have a brother with a similar sounding name, but you can still make the distinction between the two of them. The hard truth of it all, though, is that we don't know what Jon's real name would have been had Rhaegar survived to see him born. Though it seems that with how Rhaegar was about prophecy, he might have been trying to recreate the Targaryen trinity through his kids, Aegon and Rhaenys. Jon might have actually been named after Visenya. The name Viserys comes to mind, but I don't feel like having another Aegon the Elder and Younger on my hands since Viserys is still around in this timeline. So we'll say that Jon's new name in this timeline is Valerion. Not to be confused with Valyrian or Velaryon. Valerion is spelled like Balerion, the Black Dread, but with a V instead of a B. The name Valerion was actually the name of one of the old King Jaehaerys' sons, but he died when he was a baby. So we're putting that name to use again with Jon. And he is born the second son of Prince Rhaegar. This presents our second problem. Is baby V considered legitimate? Now, for some of us that may seem obvious because when we go by the show, it's said by Bran that Rhaegar and Lyanna married in secret and he annulled his marriage to Elia. Even with that being said, would anyone actually consider this secret marriage valid and legitimate? It happened in secret between three people without the knowledge or consent of Rhaegar's wife, who is still alive in this timeline, mind you. If we go by the show, say they married in secret and Rhaegar just shows up with Jon, would anyone actually acknowledge his marriage to Lyanna as lawful? She's dead, so they can't ask her anything. And is the Septon who performed this ceremony even alive? Does the Citadel have documents to prove this marriage even happened? Would it even matter, considering it happened without Elya's knowledge? If it did, I imagine this knowledge would break Elya's heart. She loved Rhaegar, and this would undoubtedly piss off Dorne. This whole thing, this war, pretty much started because Rhaegar wanted a prophecy baby, and now he's replaced their sister with a woman who is now dead and not doing anything for him. The only thing that will be keeping them loyal after this insult and humiliation would be Elya's children. Divorce or not, they were still Rhaegar's first kids, and they came before his second son in terms of succession. But say he does the unthinkable and names his prophecy baby heir over his first children because of the Song of Ice and Fire. This could very well cause another Dance of the Dragons, but without the dragons since they're all dead. But let's say his marriage to Lyanna doesn't count because Elya had no knowledge of the annulment, no knowledge of the marriage, and did not consent to any of it. Rhaegar's son is still born a bastard. Instead of Jon Snow, we get Valerion Waters. Or Sand, considering he was technically born in Dorne, but that's besides the point. It technically wouldn't even matter if he was born a bastard, because if Rhaegar becomes king, he can just legitimize him at any time, and Elya will remain his queen, but his actions would definitely cause a rift to form in the family, though I don't think Elya will take this frustration out on his son like Catelyn did. Elya is from Dorne, and they're more accepting of bastards over there. So I think she'd be more understanding of the kid. He didn't ask to be born, and she wouldn't hold that against him. So this time around, Jon grows up in a family that pretty much accepts him wholeheartedly. I mean, he had that with the Starks too, but this time he'll actually have a mother figure in his life that doesn't want him dead. He'll grow up as a second son. Still no inheritance since his brother Aegon will be heir since he's still alive, but his life will be much better than it was before. And this won't be the only change in King's Landing. Since Rhaegar is still married, Cersei never becomes queen, and for his brilliant mind in helping overthrow his father, Tywin will probably be named as Rhaegar's Hand of the King. And after this, Tywin would most likely ask that Jaime is released from his vows as a Kingsguard, because Aerys naming Jaime to it in the first place wasn't even because of his honor or his skill, it was just to hurt Tywin. So Rhaegar would probably grant this request and release Jaime from his vows, which would make him the heir to Casterly Rock again. And say he still stays at court with Tywin, if he still feels like being an honorable and chivalrous knight, he could join the City Watch if he wants. Their vows aren't for life, I'm pretty sure. Tywin and Jaime could start to mirror Lionel and Harwin Strong from House of the Dragon. And another fun bit to add to this, Sir Arthur Dayne would also still be alive since he would never been stabbed in the back and killed by Ned. The Kingsguard will have more true and noble knights, not just ones picked for the sake of politics. Westeros has changed forever, and with Rhaegar so obsessed with prophecy, I imagine a lot of his reign would be preparing for the Long Night. To do this, I imagine one of his major goals would be securing the North since they're pretty much the key to everything. But it would be very tense after everything that happened. So many people died because of the Targaryens. 3 Starks died because of him and his father. He wants to mend those wounds. The realm would need to stand as one for the coming of the Long Night. So Rhaegar trying to ally with the North would take the place of the original first episode of OG Thrones. When the king rides north, it's Rhaegar instead of Robert. Elya and Arthur Dayne are there instead of Cersei and Jaime. So this time, Bran won't get pushed out of a window for seeing something he shouldn't. But despite that, things would be very tense for everyone with Rhaegar around, of course, considering everything that happened. It's not like it was with Robert. I imagine Ned wouldn't hate Rhaegar, but they are definitely not best friends. At most, there's some mutual respect for each other. King Rhaegar would want to see the crypts of Winterfell like Robert did so we could see Lyanna's grave while his children mingled with Ned's. He would want his son Valerion to get to know his mother's side of the family, especially for what he was about to do. Rhaegar needs the North for the coming Long Night, and what better way to ensure an alliance than through blood? Sure, he already has a connection to the Starks through his youngest son, But, as I said before, things are still very strained between the families because of everything that happened. So to rebuild that bond, he would make a proposal.
I have a son, you have a daughter. We'll join our houses.
Rhaegar will propose that his youngest son, Valerion, wed Ned's daughter, Sansa. Now, of course, I hear you all cringing, because in canon, while they weren't siblings by blood, they believed that they were, and they were raised like it, when in reality, they were cousins. But in truth, them being related doesn't really matter. Not just because of Targaryen incest, but because cousin-to-cousin marriage is actually considered normal in Westeros. It's not viewed as incest. Tywin Lannister, everyone's favorite dad, actually married his first cousin, Joanna Lannister, the mother of Cersei, Jaime, and Tyrion. So him making this proposal would not be seen as weird at all in world. Ned and Kat would be skeptical of this after everything their family went through as a result of the Targaryens, but ultimately Ned would accept this because things are different now. They lost. He remembers that. Even without dragons, the Targaryens overcame, and like Torrhen Stark, the last king of Winterfell, the Quiet Wolf would kneel. But more than that, the reason he accepts isn't because he respects or trusts Rhaegar, it's because of Valerion. He's not putting his faith in Rhaegar the king, but his sister's son. Honestly, when it comes to what ifs, especially big ones like this, it all becomes a choose-your-own-adventure kind of story, because there is no telling how big the butterfly effect will be. I try to stay as true to the characters as I see them as possible, and offer what I believe is most likely to happen with liberties here and there. So much changes just from Rhaegar living. Like, one thing I didn't even mention yet, with Rhaegar winning, Viserys and Daenerys never have to go overseas to escape Robert. This most likely means that Viserys ends up being a better person, maybe a little arrogant, but he wasn't an asshole for no reason in canon. Viserys lost everything before he was even a teenager. His dad died, his brother died, his mom died giving birth, his family home was stolen from him, and he had to raise his baby sister alone. All he had was the knowledge that he was the rightful heir to a fallen dynasty. All he had were the stories to rely on while he raised his sister alone, as a beggar. Him, the crown prince, one of the last dragons and remnants of old Valyria. That is a lot mentally for a child to handle. So with Rhaegar winning, even if his mom dies, Viserys has a place, a stable place to grow up in, without the weight of being heir or king and having to raise his little sister pretty much on his own. Speaking of which, if Daenerys and Viserys never go overseas, it means she never gets married to Khal Drogo, and her whole arc in Essos with the Dothraki and Meereen is cut out entirely. Not to mention, she probably doesn't get those dragon eggs. So Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion do not exist. Unless Rhaegar has a dragon dream or something, which propels him to go to Essos and get the eggs. But even if he does, how would he hatch them? The whole thing with Daenerys even hatching the eggs was said to be a freak accident by George himself. And how would Rhaegar possibly know how to replicate that process to get dragons? If he isn't careful, we might end up having a Summerhall 2.0. Either way, the Long Night will most likely be dragonless. Not that they were that useful anyway, or any of the Targaryens for that matter. Certainly not the prince who was promised. This story could go lots of ways, but these are my thoughts. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you thought in the comments, and I will see you all next time.